What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another Chuck Norris November review. This week we're going back to 1977, relatively early in Chuck's career. Don't muck around with an 18-wheel trucker. I guess you could have also said don't muck around with Chuck. This is Breaker Breaker. And yes, this might be an early effort from Chuck. It's not quite up to some of the higher standards of his later films. Now, I know Chuck in the past several years has sort of transcended, he's become like a pop culture icon with the jokes and the memes and everything. But back in the 70s and 80s, the critics weren't really kind to these films. Last year for Chuck Norris November, I kept making the point that a lot of these films were really pretty well-made films. I mean, some of them may have had a little bit of pacing issues and so forth here and there, but really pretty good. This one is a little more amateurish in terms of editing and scene transitions and things, but it's still pretty good. And just like Force of One was sort of capitalizing on the martial arts craze at the time and also had a subplot involving skateboarding because that was big, this one is capitalizing on the trucking and CB radio craze of the 70s. CB radios were kind of big in the 70s. Now, I didn't go to college in the 70s. I went in the late 80s into the 90s. But I did know someone in college, one of my friends, and she had a CB radio in her car. And it was kind of cute because her call sign was Snowflake. She was like, "Oh, it's great. The truckers help me out. They told me where where accidents are and speed traps are and everything." It's just pretty funny. So yeah, that was a huge thing. And in the beginning, so let me just go over the plot real quick. There's a town that gets a new charter in California called West Texas. And the leader of this town is the judge, played by George Murdoch, maybe one of the only other really recognizable people in the film. He would go on to play an admiral in Star Trek The Next Generation. I know that. Seemed like he was old for about 30 years, one of those guys. He drinks in the day and hangs out at the bar and stares at the one waitress's cleavage. And then whenever they get somebody that comes through town, they will sort of get them into the courthouse on trumped up charges and impound their vehicles and scrap metal them. And I don't really know if that would actually be profitable, but that's what they're doing. So in the beginning, we meet Chuck and his younger brother who's competing in motocross, another very sort of faddish thing that was big in the 70s. I like those movies too. And he's also a truck driver, so he sets off on a route and Truck gives him some advice, but then he runs afoul of this town and they lock him up, and then he realizes how corrupt it is and he kind of panics and tries to escape, and then Chuck comes into town and tries to find him, kicks a bunch of ass, goes into hiding, has a romantic relationship with a waitress in town who's the only one in town that doesn't seem to be on the same page. Well, there's one other guy, the owner of the scrapyard / garage that's in on this scheme, has a brother who is a mentally challenged individual who's very friendly. And, he just doesn't have a mean bone in his body. So once he sort of figures out that something is wrong, he becomes a sympathetic character too. So lots of scenes of Chuck kicking people's asses. Lots of well choreographed kicks. Lots of chasing. Chuck has a van that he drives around in, when he's not driving his truck, of course, that's got a big eagle on the side. Another big thing from the 70s. My dad drove a van for work. And he would put so many miles on them that I remember 3 or 4 different ones. And he got one once from a younger guy, and the van was called the Gambler. It didn't have a mural on the side, but the back windows were shaped like dice. And he actually got the stereo system taken out. I was like, no, because it was so loud. And this thing was so powerful. It was like, wah, 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 wah. I drove it over to my friend's house once, and they were like, they couldn't get over it. So he drives into town. He's not very... It's kind of hard to hide when you're kicking people's asses all over the place and you're driving around in a van with a big eagle on the side. And they also have a guy in town who's a helicopter pilot, so it's very hard to hide. Well, eventually they find him. He has to find his brother. The waitress kind of helps him out. There's lots of chase scenes, lots of ass kicking. At the end, some of his trucker buddies come into town and there's lots of CB chatter because the movie's called Breaker Breaker. The only thing is, although we met some of these other truck drivers in the beginning, we don't really know who any of these people are at the end. It's just, you see just a bunch of trucks coming to town, and it's just a bunch of CB chatter as they're making the whole town shake, and then they start driving through the buildings and wrecking the place, and of course everybody dives out just in time. You know, in a lot of these movies, the sort of subgenre of trucking movies, movies like Convoy and White Line Fever, it's the way they present the truckers. They're a surprisingly sympathetic and diverse bunch of people, you know, who help each other out. So you don't really get much of that in this. I mean, this movie's an hour, less than an hour and a half, and it doesn't really need to be any longer than that. So, you know, it kind of tries to shoehorn that into the end a little bit, the trucking slash CB radio aspect. But overall, still pretty entertaining. The final fight is just with one of the cops. I don't think they ever established that he was some kind of a badass. As a matter of fact, I think Chuck had already kicked his ass a few times. You know, he's in a horse stable drinking a beer, and he's like, "You want a drink?" And Chuck's like, "No." And then they start fighting. And what do you think happened? I don't know. If you're a Chuck fan, I say check it out. If you're not really a Chuck fan, but if you can, if you don't mind Chuck in a pretty solid film that's like a political thriller, or if you want to delve deep into martial arts, he's got a number of those, of course. This one is definitely more of an early effort from Chuck, and it's a little uneven, but kind of fun. That's my review. What are your thoughts about Breaker Breaker? Come back again for some more Chuck Norris reviews, and I will talk to you next time.